Hi there. Today I thought I'd talk a little about the life of this lady, Mary Queen of Scots. Of all the characters in Scotland's great rich history, there is none, I would argue, whose life was so romantic and yet so disputed as Mary's. She has been the subject of many books and films over the years. But because of her complex character, they tend to present differing views. The conundrum now, over 500 years after her death, is the same as it's always been. Was Mary a poor victim, usually portrayed of English plotting? Or was she a devious, manipulative, plotting woman intent on power for herself? So today I'm just going to give you my view of it, and hopefully that may help you form your own judgment.
This story starts in 1542, here at Linlithgow Palace, 20 miles west of Edinburgh, where she was born, the daughter of King James V of Scotland and his French wife, Mary of Guise. Just 6 days later, Mary's father dies, following a disastrous invasion by his army into England, where it was comprehensively defeated at the Battle of Solway Moss. Mary is proclaimed Queen of Scots. This tiny infant Mary now becomes a pawn in global politics, in which the most telling issue is religion. Remember, this is the age of Reformation. Scotland was rapidly turning away from Catholicism to become a Protestant state, and England under King Henry VIII had already split with Rome and established its own Reformed Church. Mary's mother, Mary of Guise, however, was a powerful French noblewoman from the ambitious House of Guise and Catholic. So years of arguments, intrigues and conflict between the ruling Scottish Protestant lords and those who supported Mary's mother now followed. I think it's important to understand at this point that Mary also had a strong claim to the English throne, as her grandmother had been Margaret Tudor, the eldest daughter of King Henry VII, who had married King James IV of Scotland. So, Protestant England and Catholic France, long-time traditional foes, both had a keen interest in this young Scottish lassie and in using her to advance their own interests. At first, the Scots agreed that the young Queen Mary would be married to the son of Henry VIII of England, Prince Edward, and a treaty to this effect, the Treaty of Greenwich, was signed. However, the lords supporting Mary's mother, who was by now ruling Scotland as regent, managed to have the treaty torn up, thereby incensing Henry of England, who invaded Scotland. Mary's mother turned to France for help, and it was agreed Mary would now be betrothed to Francis, the Dauphin, or Crown Prince, of France, and she was dispatched to France for her safety and to be educated. Mary then spent most of her young life in France, at that time one of the wealthiest and most powerful nations on earth, at the glittering court of her future father-in-law, King Henry II. Vivacious, beautiful and clever, Mary had a promising time at the French court and was a favourite with everyone. She could play musical instruments, recite poetry, ride horses, and speak French, Italian, Latin, Spanish and Greek. She was exceptionally tall for those times, at 5 foot 11 inches, and this, combined with her long graceful neck, bright auburn hair and hazel brown eyes, ensured she dazzled everyone. When she was 15, Mary married Francis, who was a sickly, stunted child aged only 14, with spectacular pageantry in Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris. Mary was described as 100 times more beautiful than a goddess of heaven. Just over a year later, in 1559, King Henry II of France died after a jousting accident, and her husband Francis ascended the throne. Aged only 16, Mary was now Queen of France as well as Queen of Scots.
Then, in the space of little over a year, everything went wrong for Mary. Firstly, her mother died, and with it the powerful political protection that had given Mary. Secondly, tragically, her husband, the new King of France, also died. Mary, aged only 17, was left alone in a complex and dangerous world. No longer Queen of France, she had to return to Scotland, where she was viewed with suspicion. Scotland by now was a Protestant country, and there were concerns that Mary and her French friends would force the country to revert to Catholicism. Mary refused to become a Protestant, but agreed that she would conduct her own religious services in private in the Palace of Holyrood House at the bottom of the Royal Mile. Mary then made what I feel was her first really big mistake.
As Queen, Mary needed a new husband so she could sire an heir for the Scottish throne. In choosing her first cousin, the English Catholic Lord Darnley, apparently because she was bewitched by his good looks, she even described him as the lustiest and best proportioned long man that I have ever seen, she managed to upset everyone, but especially her cousin, Queen Elizabeth I of England. This marriage to Darnley would strengthen Mary's claim to the English throne, and Elizabeth had already refused Darnley permission to marry. Darnley was vain, arrogant, objectionable, reckless, proud and stupid, and involved in every sort of sexual excess which had left him with syphilis. He made enemies of everyone and began plotting with foreign Catholic powers to usurp Mary and to be made King of Scotland in his own right. Mary had become pregnant, but the couple soon fell out, with Darnley spending much of his time in the brothels of Edinburgh. Mary became very close to her Italian Catholic private secretary, David Rizzio, whom she then made Secretary of State. Jealous of his relationship with Mary, Darnley joined in a plot with Scottish nobles to murder Rizzio. Darnley wanted it to be done in front of Mary in the hope the shock would make her miscarry and die, and he would be crowned king. So, on the 9th of March 1566, the Queen, who was 5 months pregnant at this time, and Rizzio were in her private dining room in Holyrood Palace when the rebels burst in and demanded Rizzio be handed over. The Queen refused. Rizzio hid behind Mary's skirts but was dragged out and brutally stabbed to death in front of her. You can still see this room and the spot where the murder took place in the palace today. With help from her new friend, the Earl of Bothwell, Mary had the murderers banished from Scotland, but could not publicly admit her husband was involved in case it jeopardised her baby's claim to the throne of Scotland. Darnley brazened it out, denying any involvement, but continued plotting Mary's downfall.
Things were not going well now for Mary, but in June of that year she gave birth in Edinburgh Castle to a son, the future King James VI of Scotland. There was now no way Darnley could become King of Scotland. Darnley left Edinburgh and moved to live in Glasgow. His syphilis had broken out again and his face was badly disfigured. He was unable to attend the sumptuous christening ceremony that Mary organised for our new son in the chapel at Stirling Castle, and he was now shunned by everyone, including his foreign Catholic noble friends, who by now were aware of his involvement in the murder of Rizzio.
In January 1567, Mary attempted a reconciliation with Darnley and encouraged him to return to Edinburgh to convalesce in lodgings called Kirk-o-Fields. The following month the house was blown up by henchmen of Lord Bothwell. Darnley escaped but was caught in the garden and smothered to death. Suspicion soon fell on Mary's new friend Lord Bothwell, and when Mary married him only 3 months later, the people of Scotland were horrified and turned against her. Both Protestant and Catholic alike were shocked that Mary should marry the man accused of murdering her husband, and felt she must have been involved. Mary was forced to abdicate her throne by the Scottish lords and fled to England, asking her cousin, Queen Elizabeth I, to protect her. She was still only 25 years old, had been Queen of France, Queen of Scotland, and married 3 times. In 1587, after 19 years of exile in England, she was tried for plotting against Elizabeth and executed.
So, that eternal conundrum. Was Mary one of history's most beautiful victims? Or was she a lying, devious plotter? Personally, I think neither. That she made some disastrous decisions during her reign, especially those connected with her choice of husbands, cannot be denied. However, what I think happened was Mary was caught up in the intensely complex political and religious issues that were sweeping through Europe at that time, and for which she was ill-equipped to handle. And eventually they swept Mary aside. I hope you enjoyed this little video. Thanks very much for watching.